This past week was a big week for businesses and consumers and everyone around the world talking about tariffs. And in the watch industry, I actually think we have a pretty simple industry here in the US. The products we make are relatively simple. They don't have a lot of electronics in them. In fact, there are no electronics in a mechanical watch. Whereas everything that I use to make a mechanical watch is full of electronics. When I look around my workshop, almost everything came from another country, except for the raw material. So the bars of metal we have sitting around that will be turned into watch parts came from the US. But all of the machines, all of the cutting tools, all of the motors in the machines, all of the robotic controls in the machines, all the computers we use to design these parts and control the machines, all of our cleaning equipment, all of our watchmaking tools, everything was made in another country and then brought to the US to support a tiny little part of the watchmaking world. With such a rapid shift in cost, it really makes business tough. You have to make some decisions that don't really have long-term solutions. And working in the short term like that, trying to figure out what happens next, if in 90 days there will be tariffs or there won't be tariffs, we don't really know. But we have to come up with plans that are long-term plans, even though we don't know what's happening in the next 90 days. And for the fine timepiece world, with the US being the leading market for Swiss watchmakers, there's a lot to process and figure out between now and 90 days. If I was running a Swiss watch company, I would be focusing on getting as many of the Swiss watches that may have been allotments for the rest of the world. I'd be trying to get them to the US within the next 90 days to support the US market that may have a 31% tariff after that 90-day window. All of these shifts and changes will lead to less long-term efficiency with long-term projects. We might see next year we don't have as many new releases. We could see companies limiting the number of things they produce, the different types of watches. Then fewer things need to be imported into the US market. So an overall simplifying is probably going to take place. Another thing I would probably focus on next if I was a Swiss watch brand would be tourist destinations for Americans. Because Americans are one of the biggest consumers of Swiss watches. And if there's a 31% tariff for watches being purchased in the US, then Americans might start purchasing their watches when they're abroad on vacation. So focusing on those tourist markets where Americans would buy those watches would probably be wise. That brings me to my next point, which is the thought that if Americans start buying their Swiss watches while they're abroad, that directly impacts the American retail and wholesale networks that we have in place. All of our watch and jewelry stores will be affected. The number of American jobs for Swiss companies could decrease if the purchasing of watches for the American market actually shifts abroad. meaning the US won't see as much of that money that's exchanging hands for Swiss timepieces. Now, as a manufacturer in the US, I have a lot invested in tools and equipment. And almost all of that includes foreign made tools because it is such a specialized industry. And that crosses over to every industry. If you're in automotive manufacturing, or you are in semiconductors or chips or anything, it requires very specialized tooling. The machines and equipment will have to come from abroad in order to support any of those industries. And that puts a big barrier for American companies that want to bring these things back to the US. There's also a lack of knowledge in these manufacturing industries. I myself have been advertising a position for a Swiss style lathe machinist and programmer for over 5 years and have not been able to fill that position. This type of high precision manufacturing is pretty rare in the US, especially when you get down to these micro levels, tiny little parts, smaller than a grain of rice. That could be fixed with better training, better education, technical schools that focus on this sort of thing and have the budgets to actually put one of these fancy machines in front of the students. But we haven't had that for a very long time. A lot of our technical schools are really using old equipment because it's very expensive, and most of the companies that are making the top-end equipment are foreign companies. They are not as heavily invested in these markets because this is not where the manufacturing is taking place. So they haven't seen it as such an essential thing to make sure that they're training the next generation of workers. One company that I work with is Chiron, and they have one of the most impressive apprenticeship programs that I've seen in the US. They're a German company. The machines are made in Germany and brought to the US, where they're finished and set up and sold. And then all the programming and maintenance and every additional thing that is necessary to support that machine can be done in the US. But there are very few companies that have that sort of apprenticeship program going in the US. But this is a German company. And if their machines are now going to have an additional tariff, that may limit their presence in the US. Additionally, a big challenge for American watch companies, such as Shinola or Timex, will be the Chinese tariffs, which were not rolled back. In fact, they were increased multiple times over the past few days. These American companies employ a lot of Americans. Now they'll have to raise their prices, potentially shift their production from China to another country. It's very unlikely that production will come to the US because of the price of their product. However, it hurts an American company and American employees. In the long term, it doesn't really do anything to bring their watch production to America. It just shifts their watch production away from China. As a business owner, these kinds of shifts and changes are the trickiest thing that we have to deal with, especially in watchmaking. In watchmaking, we're making an antique, obsolete item, something where design-wise it has changed very little. but the business landscape around it changes frequently. And with changes like the ones we're dealing with now, it makes the business side very complex. I think that a smart thing for America would be to have visa programs that are more accessible to small business owners so that we can actually have some immigration into the US that includes people who are knowledgeable in these types of manufacturing jobs that we don't have in the US. That paired with better technical schools, more support for education, those two things together could actually lead to a new generation of American citizens that are able to produce these things in a way that is actually truly competitive with the rest of the world, instead of just placing barriers in the way that the global economy has to deal with, and it really negatively affects American businesses. In the long term, I think that we are going to see some big changes. We definitely have this problem of volatility. Consumers have a lot of challenges right now dealing with the possibility of some serious inflation. We'll see fewer choices in products to purchase and more expensive products. And I think all of that is going to be our biggest challenge because of the shifts in where things are going to be made. Even the biggest companies in the world are going to be shuffling around their production. And this sort of thing is very expensive, and these expenses will trickle down to the consumer. But one way to keep those expenses in check is by simplifying the product. One of the things that I did here with Weiss was keeping our product simple, because the challenge of producing a line of watches with every complication or option or color, material, is just too much for a small company in a country where watch manufacturing doesn't take place. I was able to start this business by keeping it very simple. And we're still here after 12 years with a very simple line of what I like to call timeless watches that are not that complex to manufacture in the world of watchmaking. Keeping it simple was what allowed us to make things here in the US. That doesn't mean that it wasn't challenging still, and that we still don't have more challenges ahead of us, but simplicity helps.